Here are 29 players and 11 different defenses for you to consider adding to your Week 7 fantasy football lineup either before waivers run or after waivers clear, including recommendations for whether or not that player is worth blind bidding dollars or waiver wire priority. Right here on episode 43 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. What is up, my friend? It's Mikey Henninger from Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, and welcome into episode 43 of Inside the 20, which is going to be our Week 7 waiver wire episode. Now, if you've never tuned into one of these episodes before, know that in the show notes, in the description, you're going to find a link to a waiver wire cheat sheet that I create every single week. Now, it's completely free. Grab it. It's all yours. Do with it what you wish. But in that cheat sheet, you are going to find a list of 29 different names, 11 different defenses that are worth considering adding to your Week 7 fantasy football lineups. Now, on that cheat sheet, you're going to find not only the players, but you're also going to find notes for those players and recommendations for whether or not that player is worth spending waiver wire priority or blind bidding dollars. And the reason I do it that way is because one of the biggest mistakes I see fantasy football players make in a typical redraft league is that they burn blind bidding dollars, they burn waiver wire priority on guys that won't even make it into their starting lineup. They're just bench decorations and nice depth and bench stashes. When in all reality, a lot of the names that they spend that waiver wire priority or those blind bidding dollars on, they probably could have waited until waivers ran and then just picked them up for free the next morning. And fantasy football is a game of playing chess while your opponents are playing checkers. Now, obviously, keep your own league and your own settings in mind, right? Whether you play in an 8-team league, a 12-team league, a 16-team league, PPR or not PPR, how many wide receivers or running backs you start, how deep is the bench, how shallow is the bench, all of those things matter. But generally speaking, the players that are on this list are rostered in, at, or around, or below 50% of fantasy football leagues that are out there. And of course, if you'd like some help identifying who to prioritize and or who is or isn't worth spending waiver wire priority or blind bidding dollars, then feel free to consider joining Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Discord server, which is an online community. It's an online army of 175 plus other fantasy football players helping each other dominate the fantasy football season. It's also where I spend 100% of my time hanging out 24/7, 365. It's where I share exclusive insights, golden fantasy football nuggets, the very second I find them. So if you want to come hang out with me, come hang out with us, all you got to do is go over to Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Patreon channel, which we'll leave a link for you in the show notes below. Let's get into some of the names that are on this list for Week 7. Travis Etienne has been labeled as week to week, making it unlikely that he's ready to play in Week 7, and he could be out even longer than just Week 7. Now, Tank Bigsby didn't do too much in Week 6 once Travis Etienne got hurt, but that's also because the Jaguars were getting blown out by the Chicago Bears, putting Dearness Johnson on the field in passing down situations. That won't be the case in Week 8 against the New England Patriots, who are allowing the 7th most touches, 12th most rushing yards, 12th most touchdowns, and 11th most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. Tank Bigsby is the #1 waiver wire claim in fantasy football going into Week 7. Speaking of the Jacksonville Jaguars, this next player most likely is not available in your fantasy football league, but he is available in about 1 out of every 4 fantasy football leagues right now, and that's Evan Ingram, who had 10 targets in Week 6 comeback mode. Now, Evan Ingram's not going to get 10 targets every single week, but at fantasy football's weakest position, he absolutely should be rostered in more than 76% of fantasy football leagues. If you don't have a tight end and somehow Evan Ingram is available in your leagues, you need to change that. Likewise, Austin Eckler most likely is not available in your fantasy football league, but he is available in more than 20% of them. And on the off chance that Brian Robinson is not able to play in week 7, Austin Eckler would be an instant plug-and-play RB2 with some pretty significant upside in a mouth-watering matchup against the Carolina Panthers. At worst, even if Brian Robinson does play, Austin Eckler's been a solid RB3/flex all season long. If he's somehow available in your fantasy football leagues, be sure to change that. In his very first game with Drake May at quarterback, Mario Douglas caught a very nice 6 of 9 targets for 92 yards, 1 touchdown, and 21.2 PPR points, all of which, by the way, led New England pass catchers. Now, it is worth noting that Mario Douglas did technically play the 3rd most offensive snaps among Patriots wide receivers, but he still pretty clearly has the early lead on being Drake May's wide receiver 1 moving forward. He's definitely worthy of waiver wire priority or waiver wire blind bidding dollars if you can see him in your starting lineup moving forward. Wan'Dale Robinson garnered yet another 11 targets in week 7, giving him 8 or more targets in 5 of 6 games this season. He has a gorgeous matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles on deck in week 7, and he's got Washington and Carolina coming up in weeks 9 and 10. If you can see Wan'Dale Robinson being in your starting lineup in the coming weeks, then he's definitely worth a waiver wire claim or waiver wire blind bidding dollar. DeAndre Hopkins caught 4 of 6 targets for 54 scoreless yards in week 6, but much more importantly than that, he finally played full-time snaps in the Tennessee Titans offense following their week 5 bye, playing a season-high 71% of the Titans' offensive snaps. Now, he's tied to Will Levis moving forward, and that hasn't been pretty to date. But we know DeAndre Hopkins has upside. We've seen him have upside specifically with Will Levis in the past. He definitely should be rostered in more leagues than he is. I'm not spending any sort of waiver wire priority or blind bidding dollars on him, but if I have bench space and I could use some depth at wide receiver, there's no reason DeAndre Hopkins should be as low rostered as he currently is in 2024 fantasy football leagues. It's no coincidence that Dalton Schultz had a season-high 8 targets in week 6, his first game without Nico Collins and his 10-plus targets per game in the lineup. I wrote in my week 6 heat map that in 11 games last year where one of the big 3 was out of the picture, Stephon Diggs, Dalton Schultz averaged 10.5 PPR points per game, scoring 11 or more PPR points in 6 of 11 games, including 3 over 16 PPR points with a high of 29. It's no coincidence that once one of the big 3 left the picture in Nico Collins, Dalton Schultz suddenly got more involved in the Texans' passing attack. The Texans do have some really nice matchups and potentially high-scoring games coming up against the Green Bay Packers and the Indianapolis Colts, and if you do not have a tight end, Dalton Schultz is definitely worth a look in week 7 and likely in week 8 as well. He's worth a claim if you have no other options, no other answers at tight end this week. Speaking of tight ends, if you're looking for another one, David Njoku happens to be available in more than 40% of fantasy football leagues heading into week 7. He had 7 targets in a week 6 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, and he has some good matchups and some high-scoring games against the Cincinnati Bengals and Baltimore Ravens coming up over the next 2 weeks. Of course, it's tough to trust anybody in that Cleveland Browns offense right now, but if you're in a pinch at tight end, which most people are, then David Njoku is worth seeing if he's available on your waiver wire. He's not somebody I'm rushing to the waiver wire to pick. I'm not spending any sort of priority or blind bidding dollars on him, but if I'm in a pinch and I need some help and David Njoku's available, then he's definitely worth a look and worth adding to my bench after the waiver wire runs. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A Forgemaster, or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. We'll keep it on tight end for a minute as we talk about Cade Otton, who had another 6 targets in week 6, giving him 6 or more in each of the last 4 games, 27 total over the last 4 games combined. He has some high-scoring games. He has some solid matchups coming up over the next 4 weeks against Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, and not to mention San Francisco in Week 10. He's not the type of tight end that I'm rushing to the waiver wire to get. I'm not spending any sort of waiver wire priority, blind bidding dollars, that sort of thing on Cade Otton, but I'm absolutely waking up early on Wednesday morning and adding him to a few of my rosters where I'm in a pinch and I need some help at tight end in Week 7 and beyond. One final tight end to mention in today's episode, maybe it's not somebody that you're going to add, but it's definitely a name to keep an eye on, and that is rookie tight end Ja'Tavion Sanders. In Week 6, Sanders set a new season/career high in targets with 7, catches with 5, yards with 49, and PPR points with 9.9. He now has 12 targets over the last 2 games, and he looks like he's beginning to emerge as an option, as a threat in Andy Dalton's offense. And now moving into Week 7, the Carolina Panthers are certain to have pass-heavy game script, trying to catch up to the high-powered, highly potent Washington Commanders offense. Again, maybe this isn't the type of player you're adding yet, but he's absolutely the type of player worth keeping an eye on or adding if you are in a deeper league and you could use some help at tight end. Speaking of the Washington Commanders, speaking of a player to keep an eye on, Noah Brown caught 4 of 8 targets for 58 yards in Week 6, and perhaps more importantly than that, he played the second most offensive snaps among all Commanders wide receivers, starting to look more and more like Jaden Daniels' number 2 option in that high-powered passing attack. He has a good matchup on deck with the Carolina Panthers in Week 7, and maybe he's not the type of player you're adding quite yet to the end of your bench, although I definitely recommend it if you have the space and maybe you're in a deeper league, but he's definitely a name to keep an eye on, playing the snaps that he's playing with the quarterback that he's playing in the offense that he's playing in. Keep an eye on Noah Brown. That's going to be all for today's episode, but like I said, there is a lot more where that came from. It's all in the waiver wire cheat sheet that I'm giving away for free. I have 29 names, 25 players for you to consider adding to your fantasy football roster for Week 7, including notes, including recommendations for whether or not that player is worthy of spending waiver wire priority or spending blind bidding dollars. You can get yours, again, completely free. All you got to do is click that link that we left for you in the show notes. If you want more from me, if you want more from Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, consider joining our Fantasy Football Discord server, which is an online community, an online army of 200 other fantasy football players, including myself, that are dedicated to helping each other conquer difficult decisions and dominate their fantasy football leagues. You can join us for less than 1 beer per month, $4.99 per month, using the link that we left for you in the show notes. And of course, you have to consider my weekly fantasy football heat maps, which offer contextual analysis for every single player in every single game, every single week, to help you conquer the most challenging start-sit dilemmas, identify clutch plug-and-play streamer options, and ultimately set week-wrecking DFS and fantasy football lineups. This is the resource that led to me quitting my job, quitting my corporate career to chase this dream full-time because the heat map blew up and went viral on Reddit a few years ago. You can get Week 7 for less than 1 beer at $4.99, or you can get the remainder of the 2024 NFL season all the way through the Super Bowl for $41.99. To get yours, just use the link that we left for you in the show notes. That's going to be all for today. Come back on Friday, every Friday, at noon Central. Be here, right here in the basement with me. Not literally. That would be super weird. Please don't do that. But every Friday at noon Central, I go live right here on the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football YouTube channel, and I answer as many questions about the upcoming week of fantasy football as I possibly can. And it makes sense because it takes me about 30 plus hours every week to create the weekly heat map. So I might as well take that knowledge that's swimming around in my brain and help you conquer some of your most pressing, most difficult decisions for that upcoming week. So come back every Friday, noon Central, live on the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notify me button on the upcoming episode so that you don't miss it. I will see you there. I will see you on the fantasy football field, and I hope to see you in the basement. Not my basement, not my literal basement, but our fantasy football Discord server of 200 other fantasy football players helping each other win. Click that link that we left for you in the show notes. Cheers. This brew's for you.